This video is brought to you by Keeps. What's up, guys? Michael here to talk about one of my favorite directors, a visionary who has tackled topics as fun as unhinged anchormen.
I have nothing left! Nothing! I've been reduced to rubble!
And as fraught as Wall Street greed.
Wait, he wanted to short housing bonds? Who bets against housing?
The man who once faked his own death for a sketch comedy show, Adam McKay. But perhaps to your surprise, I'm not exactly here to extol the virtues of his latest movie, Don't Look Up. After hitting Netflix at Christmas, Don't Look Up quickly became one of the platform's most watched films ever. But as anyone who's ever been the least popular kid at the laser tag birthday party can tell you, popular doesn't always equal cool. As we see it, Don't Look Up, far from perpetuating McKay's legacy as one of our era's foremost satirists, doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. Indeed, we'd argue that it fails to accomplish some of the most basic and important tasks of satire. And before you throw a planet-destroying comment at my face, hear us out in this Wisecrack Edition on Don't Look Up. Satire or propaganda? Spoilers ahead for, of course, Don't Look Up, but also for Sorry to Bother You, a Futurama episode, and some 18th century satire about eating Irish babies. But before we dive in, I want to talk to you about this video sponsor, Keeps. You may have heard the statistic that 2 out of 3 men will experience male pattern baldness of some kind by the time they're 35. That's wild. But luckily, Keeps exists. Keeps is a subscription service that makes it easier and more affordable to prevent hair loss. The process starts with a free consultation with a licensed Keeps doctor. Your doc can help you get the right combination of FDA-approved prescriptions and over-the-counter medications to help prevent further hair loss. And it's all shipped right to your door. And you won't have to worry about running out and ruining your treatment routine because Keeps automatically refills your subscription every 3 months. You can message your Keeps doctor 24/7 to update them on your progress or ask them questions. And Keeps has more 5-star reviews than any of its competitors. Get started today and you can see results in 4 to 6 months. If you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/wisecrack or click the link in the description to receive 50% off your first order. That's keeps.com/wisecrack. Now, back to the show. And now for a quick recap. Don't Look Up chronicles the attempts and ultimate failure of 2 scientists to warn the world about a planet-crushing comet that's rapidly approaching Earth. They encounter a dizzying array of incompetence. There's lots of shrugging, equivocating, and all-welling from politicians and media figures alike, in no small part because our friends hail from a state school.
Let's get some other people on this, some Ivy Leaguers. And you and I will review the NASA plans, okay?
After finally convincing the president to nuke the shit out of the comet, the scientists get hit with another rough blow. See, an Elon Musk stand-in has discovered that the comet might contain super valuable minerals.
This comet hurtling towards us from deep space actually contains at least $32 trillion of these critical materials.
So instead of blowing up the comet, he and the president decide to blow it into lots of small pieces and mine the crap out of it. Of course, this harebrained scheme fails, and the planet blows up. World over, everyone is dead, merry effing Christmas. So what gives us plebes the right to declare Don't Look Up an unsuccessful satire? Let's get into it. Now, satire is a very old art form, dating back to either the ancient Greeks or ancient Romans, depending on which antiquity nerd you ask. The genre is notoriously difficult to define, leaving most scholars to broadly label it as the section of the Venn diagram where good fun meets sharp criticism. In the words of scholar P. Michael Brown, satire aims to entertain and amuse, as well as to inform and reform. Like your pleasant dinner date with a charismatic anarchist, satire should both show you a good time and leave you reflecting on the overall state of organized society. Typically, satire critiques prevailing power structures, whether political, social, or economic. This is why literary theorist Northrop Frye referred to satire as militant irony, as ironic humor is used to change minds. The primary way that satire achieves this? According to scholar Daniel Abrahams, by employing a misrepresentation. That is, the author needs to identify a real-life problem, come up with a way to portray that problem in a grotesque, fabulous, or over-the-top fashion, and then use that metaphorical portrayal to critique and offer insight into the real-life problem. You know, like in Jonathan Swift's Modest Proposal, which argued that the solution to the poverty of Irish peasants was for them to sell their babies to the rich as a culinary delicacy. At first glance, Don't Look Up seems to check this box.
You do understand that this is an apocalyptic event. This is a large celestial body heading towards our planet at speeds that
Benji, I hear you. I hear you.
The planet-destroying comet is, very blatantly, a metaphor for the planet-destroying climate change currently rearing its ugly head from here to Santa's workshop. However, as Abrahams notes, a work is not satire when there is no implicit criticism in the misrepresentation. And that's where we really get stuck on Don't Look Up. See, climate change is inarguably caused by man-made pollution. A comet ricocheting towards Earth, on the other hand, is a big cosmic oops in which mankind is blameless. This makes the metaphor pretty shaky to begin with. It might work if humankind didn't cause climate change, but as just about every scientist with a functional brain can tell you, we totally did. By making mankind not complicit in its own destruction, Don't Look Up misses a big point about the climate crisis. What's more, the solution to the planet-destroying comet doesn't work as a metaphor either. All they have to do is shoot a nuke into the sky to stop the disaster. In contrast, stopping climate change would require a drastic transformation in our lifestyle, particularly for folks in the high-polluting countries. That's not to mention that it would necessitate creating entirely new economies and systems of production and consumption. In the film, the eventual decision not to blow up the comet comes solely because of a few people's greed. In real life, the central reason for the tepid response to climate change comes from a broad lack of political will, and a general reluctance on behalf of all of us to change our lifestyles. Let's be real. Eating hamburgers while driving an SUV is an American pastime I will not sacrifice. And if Leonardo DiCaprio wants to stop me, then I invite him to come by on his private jet and try, if a comet doesn't take him out first. Compare the misrepresentation in Don't Look Up to, say, Sorry to Bother You. In that film, the misrepresentation is in the billionaire's plan to turn workers into horses so that they can be stronger and more efficient. This functions exactly the way Abrahams says a misrepresentation should. It's a grotesque exaggeration of a very real phenomenon in which capitalism dehumanizes workers, reducing them entirely to their capacity to get it done so CEOs can make a few more bucks. The causality in this misrepresentation, unlike Don't Look Up, is pretty spot on. The failure in misrepresentation pretty much dooms Don't Look Up to be rather toothless as a satire. But there are other problems that we can understand by comparing it to more successful satires. Take the film's representation of the president. With no disrespect meant to national treasure Meryl Streep, her character is pretty one-dimensional. Cravenly obsessed with maintaining power over, say, protecting the planet from total destruction, the president reads as a blatant caricature of a Republican politician with no redeeming qualities. Denouncing her for the film's presumably mostly liberal audience is a no-brainer. It doesn't actually require any complex thought or questioning of prevailing power structures. The message seems to be bad politician equals bad. Sorry to Bother You, on the other hand, might lead a viewer to reflect on their own complicity in hustle culture and exploitative work environments. But Don't Look Up makes it easy to sit back and be proud of yourself for only voting for the good politicians, if those even exist. Spoiler alert, there are no good politicians. Plato himself said so in The Republic, so who are we to argue? In understanding Don't Look Up's failures, it's important to note that satire's success is largely contingent on its context. In part, who the presumed audience is going to be. The message of Don't Look Up is pretty clearly designed to appeal to a liberal audience who is aware of and already deeply concerned about climate change, and who have their parents' Netflix password. My mom's password, by the way, is GolfMom64. In this way, painting the end of the world as the fault of Republican politicians, conservative reporters, and a climate-denying portion of the public isn't provoking novel thoughts or inward reflection in its audience. It's reinforcing what they already believe. According to scholar Connell Condren, this is symptomatic of plenty of modern satire. He writes that, maybe that is so much satire has become mainstream, mass entertainment, that the moral edge is blunted, or is being concentrated on acceptably safe targets, and so treads carefully around contemporary patterns of taboo and sensitivity. Particularly given the film's assumed audience, critiquing a Republican president or a universally derided media world is explicitly pretty safe rather than provocative or complex. The message almost seems to be that if a good Democratic president was in charge, maybe the world wouldn't have ended, so hey, vote blue. The opposite of this, of course, is the classic scene in Get Out, where Bradley Whitford's character, non-coincidentally an actor from liberal favorite The West Wing, says,
By the way, I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president in my lifetime, hands down.
Compare Don't Look Up to a satirical show like Veep, which depicts a strong female Democratic president who is utterly selfish and power-hungry. Selina Myers pursues a green jobs initiative not because she cares about the environment, but because she wants people to think she does.
Am I still getting unequivocal support on clean jobs?
Far from portraying the good Democratic leader in the mythological vein of, say, an FDR, Veep suggests to its presumably liberal audience that power hungriness is symptomatic of all politicians. It's like opposite day West Wing, a show that basically argues that good politicians will save us all. This is far more provocative, dispelling any notions that Democrats are the good guys who will simply solve all of our problems. At the same time, Selina Myers is far from a caricature like the president in Don't Look Up. She is deeply human, and at times even sympathetic in her frustrations and insecurities. This ultimately makes for a far more interesting critique of politicians. And of course, it can force the audience to reckon with our own tendency to turn our favorite millionaire political candidates into humanitarian heroes. It's worth noting that satire can be said to have an explicitly philosophical function. If philosophy begins in wonder and encourages us to live an examined life, satire, via its use of militant irony, is trying to do something similar. As Kierkegaard wrote, satire causes pain, but this pain is oriented towards healing. When I watch Get Out, I find myself horrified that the good white liberals are literally colonizing the bodies of black people. This forces me to think about racism and my own privilege and power in a more critical way, which could be painful. But this pain leads to healing when I then see the world in a different light. But let's get back to a movie that dares to ask, what if we acted like Leonardo DiCaprio wasn't objectively hot? Perhaps the most ironic part of the Don't Look Up discourse is the oddly moralizing contention that if you don't appreciate the film, you don't care about climate change. Most notably, this was argued by none other than Mr. McKay, who really could have just logged off of Twitter and stared at his Oscar statue instead. This argument, as people who are capital C concerned about climate change, strikes us as, scientifically speaking, totally bananas. It's like saying that if you don't think the 1995 film Waterworld is a masterpiece, then you're just not concerned about melting ice caps and drinking pee. To understand why, let's go back to Abrahams. As he notes, when considering an audience's reaction to a satire, an important distinction for understanding humor and satirical misrepresentation is that between prescribed and merited responses. The prescribed response to a work of art is the response that the work attempts to bring about in its audience. The merited response is the response that the audience ought to have. That is to say, all satire attempts to entertain and critique and to provoke thought about the world around us. This is the prescribed response that satire wants to achieve. But not all satire actually earns the merited response. When we critique Don't Look Up, we're certainly not arguing with its prescribed response, to galvanize action to combat climate change. That's a totally important and valid goal. But the merited response, that is to say, the response it actually earns, isn't really successful. When McKay suggests that not liking the film means you don't care about climate change, he's conflating prescribed and merited responses. To put it more simply, you can care about climate change and still think the film fails as satire. So what does successful climate change satire look like? We'd point to the Futurama episode in which it's discovered that a huge ball of garbage shot into space by 21st century humans is headed for Earth. This right here is incisively militant irony about the sort of short-term compromising solutions that are all too familiar in global climate policy. Adding to the irony, protagonist Fry's 20th century messiness ultimately saves the day. He teaches the people of a new New York how to make trash, and they create a new garbage ball that will redirect the other one into the sun. Of course, the new garbage ball might come back in hundreds of years, but who cares about that?
Should we really be celebrating? I mean, what if the second garbage ball returns to Earth like the first one did?
Well, who cares? That won't be for hundreds of years.
This is just better satire than Don't Look Up? First off, it's simply funnier.
Ah! We're gonna die! Right?
Right.
Ah!
But more importantly, it's much more confrontational. It immediately makes the problem our fault, the inevitable result of choices made by corporations and individuals. While Don't Look Up is willing to say that our society is poorly positioned to respond to a crisis like this, it doesn't clarify that the system we live in and the world we built is at fault for the crisis. And that's what's key here. Global warming isn't just the result of a few billionaires and companies acting recklessly. It's the fault of a system that demands infinite growth and consumption. Don't Look Up never engages with the systematic issue itself, only with its symptoms. And so we're never asked to look at the world around us critically, only to clap along as the movie turns up the heat on its deserving targets. In this way, we see Don't Look Up less as satire and more as a piece of propaganda, albeit propaganda with a message we can get behind.
When we're all 100% for sure gonna die!
As scholar Nicholas Cull writes, an effective propagandist does not teach his or her audience something new, but rather tells them something they have always thought. This sounds a lot like what McKay is doing, reinforcing his audience's pre-existing beliefs in hopes of spurring them to action. Anyway, we'd argue that Don't Look Up is pretty successful propaganda. It does call attention to a genuinely terrifying existential crisis for humanity, even if it's just validating the pre-existing beliefs of its audience. And that's a fine goal, even if it's a lot less interesting than that of a good piece of satire. But what do you guys think? Have we convinced you that Don't Look Up is more propaganda than satire? Or are you at least thankful that we tried? Let us know what you think in the comments. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support, and don't forget to check out our podcast. Hit that subscribe button like you're throwing fingerling potatoes into your shopping cart, and don't forget to ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching. Later.